Hi, I'm Rabbi Melinda Panken from Temple Shari Emeth, and I have the honor to be the preacher tonight at the Greater Freehold Clergy Association Interfaith Thanksgiving service. It's one of my favorite times of the year. The theme of tonight's service is sharing bread, and I thought it might be really nice for my portion to, rather than just speak to you, turn it into a little cooking class and teach you a little bit about bread this evening. There are many kinds of breads. There's wheat, there's white, there's multigrain. We all have our favorites. We like rye in our house. And bread often reflects different cultures, right? We have naan, we have pita, we have ciabatta, we have French baguettes, all kinds of breads from around the world. And there are even Jewish breads. Tonight I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk to you about challah. This is the braided bread that we eat on Shabbat in Jewish homes and also on holidays. This one is store-bought from my favorite place, Bagel World. And but tonight I'm going to show you a little bit about how challah is made and how even in the process of making challah, it is a very spiritual event. I just want to say a word about the pandemic. During the pandemic, people started baking a lot, and I decided that I would try my hand at bread like a lot of people. So a friend gave me sourdough starter, and I tried to make a good sourdough. It just didn't work. And keeping the sourdough alive was like having another pet in the house. So I decided instead I would try my hand at making challah, and it became a regular weekly activity as I prepared for Shabbat. Now, when we bake challah, there's a really spiritual element to it, because not only is it the act of blessing the bread and eating it at the end, but all through there are certain rituals that I want to share with you tonight. First of all, there are the ingredients, and even the ingredients have symbolism. Think about the sugar for a second. We include sugar in the bread, and the sugar gives it sweetness because we hope that there'll be sweetness in life. There's water in the bread, which has to do with mayim chaim, with the water of life, a life-giving resource. There are eggs in the bread. Eggs are potential, something that can be born. And you can see my yeast is very puffy, the whole idea of growth and expansion. So even when we use these ingredients, they're supposed to bring something spiritual and meaningful into our life. And now I'm going to show you how to bake the bread. First, I take my oil, and I take some salt, and I take my sugar, and I mix that up a little bit in my bowl just to get it mixed up together. And then I take boiling water and I put it in here because that's going to melt my sugar. But because I'm going to add my eggs soon, I don't want it to get too hot. So I'm going to add half a cup of cold water, ice water, to cool it down before I add my eggs. I mix that up to cool it down, and then I add my eggs in and get it ready to start incorporating my yeast. You can see that my yeast has been growing and expanding. Hopefully, when we eat this, we'll all grow not in our waistline, but in our minds and our spirit. And then once I incorporate the yeast in here, I start adding a lot of flour, 6 cups of flour. I'm going to add a little here, and then I'm actually going to move into combining it in my mixer. First, I'm going to use my whisk just to get it mixed in, and then I will go to my hook in a few moments. And I'm going to keep incorporating my flour until all 6 cups are mixed in. I always think as I make bread how grateful I am to have all of these wonderful gadgets in my kitchen that make it so much easier my great-grandmothers must have had really, really strong arms. While that's mixing, I'm going to get a big bowl ready because my dough is going to need to proof. So I'm going to take some oil, smudge it around. My dough is almost incorporated. And then I'm going to put it out on my mat and knead it until I incorporate about a cup more or so of flour. And now I'm gonna sprinkle some flour on my mat, and the dough is gonna be super sticky. See? This is the fun part. Especially if you have kids, it's fun to get them involved in the kneading and the making of challah. So now I'm gonna knead my challah until everything's like really, really incorporated, and until, see how it's super sticky right now? It's gonna be at the point where I can pass my hand over it without it sticking to my fingers like it is now. And in order to get it to that point, I'm gonna use more flour, and I'm just gonna keep kneading until it's nice and smooth and not as sticky. See, it's still pretty sticky there. Once the dough is ready, it's going to go into either an oven to proof at 100 degrees for an hour, or you can leave it in a warm spot. It just has to be in a warm place so that the yeast can grow. So after an hour of proofing, my dough is ready to be braided and shaped. Now, this is where things get biblical, because in the Torah, in the Jewish Bible, in the book of Numbers, it says, "When you enter the land to which I am taking you, and you eat of the bread of the land, you shall set aside as a gift some of it to the Eternal. As the first yield of your baking, you shall set aside a loaf as a gift. You shall set it aside as a gift, like the gift from the threshing floor. You shall make a gift to the eternal God from the first yield of your baking throughout the ages." Well, we no longer have the temple in Jerusalem to make offerings, so there's actually a tradition of what's called taking challah, and that's actually where the name of this bread came from. The idea that you take, as you're making it, about an ounce of it, about this much, you set it aside, and later on I will take it and I will put it in some tin foil and burn it, setting it aside as a gift to God. Once I do that, then I get to work on shaping my challah. And there are many things that happen during this time, because this is the time that we take challah. It's also a time that some people like to pray as they bake bread. Sometimes I have friends who ask for the names of people who need prayers for healing. We could pray for strength. It's a time for personal prayer as you're making the bread and shaping it. The shape of challah can be many different forms. In fact, I know people who make a big turkey-shaped challah for Thanksgiving, but usually it's braided like this challah is, and like you'll see in a few moments I'm going to do with this dough. And sometimes too it comes in a round shape, particularly around the new year, to remind us of the cycle of life. And there are other times where people make challahs like in the shape of a ladder when we get to the Torah portion about Jacob's ladder. The whole idea of making it into a form like that is to bring beauty into the bread, not just make it into bread, but to make it into something beautiful, to beautify the mitzvah of making it. So I take my challah and I cut it into 3 equal pieces, and then I'm going to roll them out into long, long strands. I'm just going to do 3 for you tonight, but sometimes I do 4. Sometimes you can do 6. You can do as many strands as you want. You just have to be able to braid it. So here's my nice long strand. I'm going to try to get it even so that each of them braids nicely. I'm going to put that over there. I'm going to start on this one now. And it's about the same size. It's going to shrink a little bit as it sits there, but I want to try to get them nice and even. Then I take the strands and I put them next to each other. And some people like to start in the middle with their braiding. And I braid the bread like that. And then I flip it around like this. And I continue the braiding on this side. And now I have this nice challah. See, it's shaped. And I'm going to put it over here. And then that's going to go back into the oven for another 45 minutes to proof and rise again. And then I'm going to take it out after that, paint it with some egg, and then bake it for real this time. So, another 45 minutes have passed. My challah has done a second rising. I'm taking it back out of the oven, and I'm going to give it an egg wash now to make it nice and pretty and shiny. Take a little egg with one egg with a little bit of water in it to thin it out. And this is what gives it the nice yellow, shiny texture on the outside of the bread when it's done. There's another nice teaching about the 3 braids and the fact that they symbolize strength. Think about if you have a piece of twine, it's strong, but if you braid it with 2 other pieces of twine and you have a braid, it becomes much stronger. And so in some ways, the challah also symbolizes strength for us. I'm going to pause here, put it back in a 350-degree oven for 25 minutes, and when I take it out, it will be hot and smell delicious and be ready for eating. So my challah is done. I wish you could smell it because it makes the whole house smell delicious. When we put it on our table, we often put it on a beautiful challah platter, and we cover the challah up. There are a couple of traditions and rituals that go along with the challah before we eat it. First of all, we say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed is the eternal our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. So before we eat even just a bite, we have to say thank you and be grateful for this beautiful bread and the sustenance on our table. The second tradition with the challah is that we don't slice the challah with a knife. We actually tear it. And the reason that we do that is because a knife is an implement of war. And the challah, by tearing it with our hands as opposed to using a knife, reminds us always to pursue peace, always to bring peace into our homes. The final tradition with the challah on our table is that we cover it with a beautiful challah cover. It could even be just with a napkin. But the reason why you cover it is, particularly on Shabbat, we say the blessing over the wine and the candles before we even say the blessing over the challah. And we don't want the challah's feelings to be hurt that everything else gets blessed before it does. Now, you may think that's really crazy. A challah doesn't have feelings. But it's meant to teach us that if we can be sensitive to the feelings of a piece of bread and cultivate that kind of compassion towards even an inanimate object, then we can learn to be compassionate to everyone around us. I want to finish with a story about a challah, and it has to do with the biblical quote that I shared with you just a little bit ago. There was a story of a rich man who was half asleep during services when the rabbi read the following passage from the Torah, from the Hebrew Bible. The rabbi read, "The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, 'Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land to which I am taking you, and you eat of the bread of the land, you shall set some aside as a gift to the Eternal One. As the first yield of your baking, you shall set aside a loaf as a gift. You shall set it aside as a gift, like the gift from the threshing floor. You shall make a gift to the Eternal from the first yield of your baking throughout the ages.'" Well, the man woke up, and he believed that God was talking to him, and that God had told him to bring the gift of bread to God. So he went home, and he baked 12 loaves of challah, and he brought them back to the synagogue. But if you bring bread to the synagogue and you want to leave it as a gift for God, where do you leave it? He decided that the best place would be to put it in the ark with the Torahs. So he opened up the ark, and he put in the loaves, and then he left. Well, a few moments later, the custodian of the synagogue just so happened to come in and straighten up. Standing before the ark, the custodian prayed to God for help. You see, he had 10 children and never enough money to feed his family. So before the ark, he asked God to help him find a way to provide more sustenance for his family. Well, he finished the prayer and he opened the ark. And can you imagine what he thought? Because lo and behold, he found 12 challahs, a miracle, enough to feed his family for a few days. So he gathered up the bread, he thanked God, he closed the ark, and he went home to show his wife. Well, the rich man came back later. He just wanted to check and see what happened to his challah. And to his joy, he opened the ark and the challah was gone. His gift must have been accepted by God. Well, this just encouraged him to continue bringing 12 loaves of bread to God each week. In fact, this went on for months and months, the rich man leaving the challah in the ark and the poor man taking the challah from the ark, until one day the rabbi noticed what was happening. She called the men together and shared the truth with them, and you could imagine their disappointment. The rich man said, "I guess God never enjoyed my gift after all." And the poor man said, "I guess God hadn't been sending me help all along." "Don't you see," said the rabbi, "God has been here the entire time. Yours are the hands of God giving, and yours are the hands of God receiving. We no longer offer bread to God, but offering bread to our neighbors and feeding those in need. That is how we offer God our gifts today. So you keep taking and you keep baking, and together you bring down the divine, and each of yours is the hands of God." Dear friends, as we gather around our table for Thanksgiving, let us remember that it is a divine act to share bread, to feed our families and loved ones, and to make sure that we nourish the poor. In this season of gratitude, let us all count our blessings, and then let's take those blessings and be the hands of God and share them with others. Have a very happy and blessing-filled Thanksgiving.